So here's my latest project. It's a table, but looks like a regular table, but it's a kid's table. But the way it goes together is just like a regular table. So if you want to know how to build a table or a kid's table, watch this video. I start by ripping a piece twice as long as the legs off of the end of a 2x8. I then rip that down the middle and flatten those pieces on the joiner. Next I glue those two pieces together face to face. I start with lots of glue, spread that out, then put the pieces together and put quite a few clamps on there and then leave that drying for about an hour. While I'm waiting for the glue to dry, I'm just ripping a few more pieces to make the apron rails out of a 2x4. With the glue dried on the two pieces I glued together, I can now square that up on the jointer. I'm also ripping a piece thick enough for one apron rail off the side of the piece I glued together. That'll leave enough thickness for the legs. Now I'm marking the outline of the legs on the piece that I just ripped the apron rails off of. And now I cut out the shape of the legs on the bandsaw. Because the bandsaw leaves a bit of a rough cut, I'm smoothing out the edges of the legs on my jointer. Now I mark the other taper on the legs and cut that out on the bandsaw again. And smooth that side too on the jointer. The top of the legs is not actually tapered, so I'm cutting that part straight on the table saw. The apron rails get joined to the legs with a mortise and tenon joint. I'm using my homemade slot mortising machine to cut the mortises. Next I cut my apron rails to the exact length that I need and trim them to the desired width. Next I need to work out the thickness of my tenon. I used the 5/16 inch router bit, which works out to 312 thou, plus I need to add another 100 thou for the thickness of the saw blade. Now let's just cut out a quick test tenon to make sure it's all good. And a quick trim of that tenon on the bandsaw so I can try it out. Okay, it fits, so all good to go. Now to check all my boards so that I'll be sure that the good side is facing outwards. I'm marking a big eye on the side that will be facing inwards. Now cutting the tenons on both sides of my apron rails. I'm cutting the shoulders of the tenons on just a table saw sled. I'm also using my table saw sled to cut the ends of the tenons and finish that off on the bandsaw. Now rounding the corners of the tenons so that they'll fit into the round-ended mortises. But before I can put my mortise and tenon joints together, I have to do a few other things to my pieces. So here I'm marking the cutout that's going to be on the bottom edge of the apron rails. Now to cut out the shape of that cutout with the bandsaw. I only actually marked up one of my pieces, so I'm now using that as a template to mark the other three pieces, which I'll then cut out with the bandsaw as well. Now to clean up that rough bandsaw cut, I'm using my belt sander. I'm also cutting some slots into the rails which the hooks that hold the tabletop will attach onto. Now routing the bottom edges of my apron rails with a 1/4 inch round over router bit. And also rounding the edges of the legs. Now I can finally glue my mortise and tenon joints all together. I'm going to let these two sub-assemblies dry before I glue the rest of it together. To make the top, I'm recycling an old IKEA shelf. It's a bit longer than I need it to be, so I'm cutting it to length. The recycled IKEA shelf wasn't quite wide enough, so I'm gluing another board onto the edge to bring it up to the desired width. After I let the glue dry, I'm smoothing my joint with a hand plane, and then finishing it off with a belt sander. Now to round the corners, I'm using the bottom of a can of WD-40 to mark the arcs, which I then cut off with a bandsaw. And then I round the top and bottom edges of the tabletop with a 1/4 inch round over router bit. Next I'm cutting a whole bunch of little blocks that have a sort of a hook on them. Those hooks will hook into the slots that I got into my apron rail. They allow the table to be attached and still allow some amount of wood movement. So I hope you've enjoyed this video about building this children's table. It goes together actually exactly like a full-size table, except all the components are about 2/3 the real size. So if you want to build like a kitchen table that looks a lot like that, all you have to do is scale up the plans. So I'll post the plans for this table on my website, woodgears.ca, and I'll also post a scaled up full-size version of this table so that you can build a kitchen table from those plans. So go check out at woodgears.ca.